Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I sat alone in my empty tech office at midnight, staring at the Forbes notification glowing on my phone screen. My AI startup had just hit a $92 million valuation. The biggest moment of my entire life, and my family had missed my IPO announcement party earlier that evening. My parents, my sister Sarah, and my brother Jake all claimed they had prior commitments that were more important than celebrating with me. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Dad that made my stomach drop like a stone. Family dinner at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Important discussion. After 28 years of being dismissed as the family failure, they finally wanted to talk. Growing up in suburban Denver, I was always the overlooked middle child in the Thompson family. Dad Frank built his reputation as the owner of Thompson Construction, a company that erected half the office buildings downtown. My older brother Jake sailed through medical school and became a cardiovascular surgeon at Denver General. My younger sister Sarah graduated top of her class from law school and now runs her own practice specializing in corporate litigation. Then there was me, Ethan Thompson, the computer kid who spent his teenage years building websites and coding programs, while my siblings earned academic honors and athletic scholarships. The family dynamic was crystal clear from early on. Frank would beam with pride when neighbors asked about Jake saving lives in the operating room or Sarah winning high-profile court cases. When they asked about me, his smile would fade and he would mumble something about me figuring things out eventually. Mom Linda tried to be supportive, but even she seemed confused by my passion for technology and software development. The breaking point came during my sophomore year at Stanford. While my classmates were grinding through computer science theory, I was building the prototype for what would become my artificial intelligence platform. The technology could analyze medical data and predict patient outcomes with 94% accuracy. I saw the potential to revolutionize healthcare, but my professors wanted me to focus on textbook assignments and theoretical frameworks. I made the decision that would define the next decade of my relationship with my family. I dropped out of Stanford to pursue my company full-time. The phone call home was brutal. Frank shouted so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He called me irresponsible, ungrateful, and delusional. Sarah questioned my mental stability, and Jake suggested I was having some kind of breakdown. Mom cried and begged me to reconsider. But I pressed forward. I rented a tiny office space in a converted warehouse, lived on ramen noodles and coffee, and poured every waking hour into developing my platform. The first 2 years were a nightmare of rejected investor pitches, failed partnerships, and mounting debt. My family's skepticism seemed justified when I maxed out 3 credit cards just to keep the lights on. That changed when Dr. Amanda Rodriguez at Children's Hospital agreed to test my platform. Within 6 months, her department reduced diagnostic errors by 37% and cut treatment planning time in half. Word spread through the medical community like wildfire. Suddenly, venture capital firms were calling me instead of the other way around. Last week, everything culminated in the IPO announcement that would value my company MedAnalytics at $92 million. I planned a celebration party at the Altitude rooftop downtown, complete with panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains and catering from the city's best restaurant. I reserved a special table for my family, complete with personalized place cards and champagne flutes engraved with the company logo. The day of the party, I called each family member personally to confirm their attendance. Frank said he had a construction site emergency that couldn't wait. Jake claimed he was covering for a colleague in surgery. Sarah cited a last-minute client crisis that required her immediate attention. Mom simply said she would stay home with Dad since he was stressed about work. I stood on that rooftop surrounded by investors, tech journalists, and industry leaders, but my eyes kept drifting to the empty chairs at the family table. My girlfriend Maya noticed my distraction and squeezed my hand supportively. She had flown in from San Francisco specifically for this moment, understanding its significance, even when my own family couldn't. The next morning, I sat in my office reviewing congratulatory emails from business partners across the country. Tech blogs were calling me a rising star in medical AI. Investment firms were already inquiring about acquisition opportunities. Yet the silence from my family felt deafening. Then my phone buzzed with Dad's text message. My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. Family dinner at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Important discussion? The formal tone sent chills down my spine. In 28 years, Frank had never called a formal family meeting unless something was seriously wrong. I spent the drive to my childhood home rehearsing different scenarios in my head. Maybe they wanted to apologize for missing the party. Perhaps they had finally realized the magnitude of my success and wanted to celebrate properly. Or maybe Frank was ready to admit he had been wrong about my career choices. I pulled into the driveway of the familiar two-story colonial house and immediately noticed something unusual. Jake's silver BMW was there, along with Sarah's black Audi, but there were also 3 other cars I didn't recognize. Uncle George's red pickup truck sat behind a blue sedan that looked like Aunt Patricia's vehicle. My stomach began to knot as I realized this wasn't going to be a simple family dinner. I walked up the brick pathway I had traversed thousands of times as a child, but this time felt different. The porch light cast long shadows across the front steps, and I could hear multiple voices talking inside. Through the dining room window, I caught glimpses of more people than just my immediate family. When I rang the doorbell, Mom opened the door with a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, I could see my entire extended family gathered in the living room. Uncle George sat in Dad's favorite recliner, while Aunt Patricia occupied the couch next to my cousins Marcus and Jennifer. Sarah stood by the fireplace with a folder in her hands, and Jake paced near the window with what appeared to be printed documents. Frank emerged from the kitchen, his face wearing the same stern expression I remembered from childhood discipline sessions. But this time, something felt much more serious than a lecture about grades or chores. "Ethan," he said gravely, "we need to talk." The living room fell silent as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me, with expressions ranging from concern to outright suspicion. I'd expected a family dinner, but this felt more like a tribunal. "Sit down, son," Frank said, gesturing toward the single empty chair that had been positioned directly across from the couch where most of my family members sat. The setup reminded me of every intervention scene I had ever seen in movies, and my pulse quickened. "Dad, what's going on here?" I asked, remaining standing despite his instruction. "I thought we were having dinner." Uncle George cleared his throat and leaned forward in the recliner. As a senior loan officer at First National Bank, he had always carried himself with an air of financial authority that intimidated most family members. "Ethan, we're all here because we care about you. We've been watching you struggle with these computer fantasies for years, and we think it's time for an intervention." The word hit me like a physical blow. "Intervention? What are you talking about?" Sarah stepped forward, opening the folder she had been holding. "We've done research, Ethan. The startup failure rate in tech is over 90%. Most entrepreneurs lose everything and end up with serious debt and psychological problems." Jake moved closer, pulling out his own set of documents. "As your brother and a medical professional, I'm concerned about your mental health. This obsession with becoming rich and famous through technology isn't healthy. You're showing signs of grandiose delusions and detachment from reality." I looked around the room in disbelief. "Grandiose delusions? Are you serious right now?" Aunt Patricia spoke up from the couch, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honey, we know you think you've created something important, but these computer things are just trends. They come and go like fads. You need a real job with steady income and benefits." Cousin Marcus nodded in agreement. "My friend's brother started a tech company 3 years ago. He lost his house, his car, and his girlfriend before he finally came to his senses and got a job at an accounting firm." "That's completely different," I protested, but Uncle George waved me off. They're all the same, Ethan. People get caught up in these get-rich-quick schemes and lose sight of what really matters. Your father has been worried sick about you. Frank stepped into the center of the room, his construction worker frame commanding immediate attention. Son, I've built Thompson Construction from nothing. I know what real business looks like, and what you're doing isn't sustainable. These internet companies are worthless tech garbage that will disappear as soon as the bubble bursts. The casual dismissal of my life's work as worthless tech garbage felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Dad, you don't understand what my company actually does. I understand enough, he replied firmly. I've been asking around about these AI companies, and most of them fail within 2 years. The few that survive get bought out for pennies on the dollar. Sarah opened her folder wider, revealing printed pages covered in highlighted text. I've been researching the legal implications of failed startups. Entrepreneurs often face personal bankruptcy lawsuits from investors and professional liability issues that can follow them for decades. You've been researching me. The betrayal stung deeper than their skepticism. We've been trying to protect you, Jake said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality he used with difficult patience. The stress of maintaining these delusions is affecting your judgment. When was the last time you had a complete physical exam? Are you taking any medications? Have you been experiencing mood swings or episodes of elevated energy? I stared at my older brother in shock. You think I'm having a manic episode? I think you need professional evaluation, he replied, pulling out a business card. Dr. Harrison specializes in entrepreneurs who develop unrealistic expectations about their business prospects. He's helped several people transition back to conventional careers. Aunt Patricia reached into her purse and produced a stack of newspaper clippings. I've been collecting job listings for you, sweetheart. There are openings for construction foreman positions with your father's company, entry-level banking positions at George's Bank, and several insurance companies looking for claims adjusters. The pile of job applications felt like a slap in the face. You want me to give up my company to become an insurance adjuster? We want you to accept reality, Uncle George said bluntly. You're 28 years old with no steady income, no benefits, and no retirement savings. How do you expect to support a family someday? What happens when you want to buy a house or send kids to college? Mom Linda had been sitting quietly in the corner, but now she spoke up with tears in her eyes. Ethan, we just want you to be stable and secure. All these computer projects scare me because I don't understand them, and I worry about you living in this fantasy world where you think you're going to become a millionaire. Fantasy world. I repeated, my voice rising. Mom, my company is real. We have contracts with major hospitals across the country. Cousin Jennifer, who worked as a receptionist at a local dental office, laughed dismissively. Ethan, if your company was really successful, wouldn't you have money? You drive a 10-year-old Honda and live in a studio apartment. That doesn't exactly scream business success. The observation hit harder than I expected because it was partially true. Despite my company's growing valuation, I had reinvested every dollar back into research and development. My personal lifestyle remained modest by choice. Not necessity, but my family interpreted this as evidence of failure. Frank moved closer, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used on construction sites. Son, I've been in business for 30 years. I know the difference between real success and pipe dreams. What you're doing is gambling with your future, and we can't stand by and watch you destroy your life. The neighbors have been asking questions, Aunt Patricia added. They want to know why you're not working a regular job like other young men your age. It's embarrassing for your parents to have to make excuses for your behavior. The revelation that my family had been discussing my career choices with neighbors felt like another betrayal. What exactly have you been telling people about me? Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Jake before responding. We tell them you're going through a phase and that you'll find your direction soon. We don't mention these business ideas because we don't want people to think you're unstable. I felt my hands clench into fists as the full scope of their dismissal became clear. For years, they had been actively undermining my credibility, and treating my career like a mental health crisis rather than a legitimate business venture. Jake stepped forward with what appeared to be a medical evaluation form. Ethan, I've prepared some questions that will help us determine if you need professional intervention. Are you willing to cooperate with a basic psychological assessment? I looked at the form and felt something inside me snap. You want to give me a psychological assessment in front of the entire family? We just want to help, Mom said softly. But as I looked around the room at their faces, I realized this wasn't about helping me at all. This was about their own fears and insecurities. They couldn't understand my success, so they had decided to label it as delusion. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. You want to know about my company? Let me show you something. Ethan, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Frank said. But I was already scrolling through my phone looking for the Forbes article that had been published just hours earlier. The notification was right there at the top of my screen, along with dozens of congratulatory messages from investors and industry partners. As I opened the article, ready to prove once and for all that my success was real, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The Forbes notification showed the article had been published at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. But according to my phone's message log, Jake had sent me a text at 11:52 p.m. saying he couldn't make it to my party because of a surgery emergency. Jake had known about the Forbes article before he made his excuse for missing my celebration. My hands trembled as I stared at the timestamp on my phone screen. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Jake, I said quietly, my voice barely controlled, what time did you say your surgery was last night? My brother shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Sarah before answering. It was an emergency. I got called in around 10:30. That's interesting, I replied, holding up my phone. Because this Forbes article about my company's $92 million valuation was published at 11:47 p.m. and you texted me your excuse at 11:52. The color drained from Jake's face as he realized his mistake. The rest of the family looked confused, but I could see Sarah's expression shifting from concern to guilt. You knew, I continued, my voice growing stronger. You knew about the Forbes article before you decided to skip my party. Frank stepped forward, his face hardening. Son, you're proving our point. You're so caught up in these fantasies that you're accusing your own brother of lying. He is lying, I said, turning the phone screen toward the room. And I have a feeling he's not the only one. I walked over to the small stack of mail on Mom's end table, something I had noticed when I walked in, but hadn't thought about until now. Mom, have I been getting any mail here recently? Linda looked nervous. Well, sometimes a few pieces come here because you still use this as your permanent address for some things. Can I see it? She hesitated, looking toward Frank for guidance. Ethan, maybe we should focus on the conversation we came here to have. Show me the mail, Mom. Reluctantly, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. As I flipped through them, my worst fears were confirmed. There were letters from my company's law firm correspondents, from the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the IPO filing, and 3 unopened envelopes from major investment firms. These are all unopened, I said, holding up the envelopes. And they're dated from the past 6 weeks. Jake's face had gone completely pale. Ethan, I can explain. You've been intercepting my mail. It wasn't a question. How long has this been going on? Sarah stepped forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in as she realized the legal implications. Jake, please tell me you haven't been tampering with federal mail delivery. I wasn't tampering, he said defensively. I was protecting the family. Some of those letters looked like official government documents, and I was worried Ethan was getting in legal trouble with these business schemes. Uncle George looked alarmed. What kind of government documents? I ripped open the SEC envelope and pulled out the official filing confirmation for my company's IPO registration. The document clearly stated the preliminary valuation range of $80 to $100 million, along with approval for public trading pending final regulatory review. This kind, I said, holding up the document. Official Securities and Exchange Commission approval for my company to go public. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even Uncle George, with all his banking experience, understood the significance of SEC approval for a public stock offering. Jake tried to salvage the situation. Ethan, just because you filed paperwork doesn't mean the company is actually worth anything. The government approves lots of businesses that eventually fail. You're right, I said, pulling out my phone again. So let me show you something else. I opened my banking app and navigated to my business account. The balance showed $8.7 million in liquid assets with an additional $12 million in secured investment accounts. I turned the screen toward the room. This is my company's current cash position, not projected value, not potential earnings, actual money in the bank. Aunt Patricia squinted at the screen. How do we know that's real? You could have edited that picture. I handed her the phone. Call the number at the bottom of the screen. It's the direct line to my business account manager at Wells Fargo. She stared at the phone clearly, unsure whether to make the call. Frank moved closer, his expression shifting from dismissive to confused. Son, if you really have that kind of money, why are you still driving that old Honda? Because I reinvest profits back into research and development instead of buying luxury cars to impress people who have already decided I'm a failure. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Mom started crying softly and Sarah sat down heavily on the couch. There's more, I continued, my anger building momentum. Jake, what exactly have you been telling people about my company when they ask? I don't know what you mean. Dr. Rodriguez at Children's Hospital mentioned that someone claiming to be my family member called her office last month asking questions about my mental stability and whether my work was legitimate. Jake's face went red. I was concerned about you. I wanted to make sure you weren't harassing medical professionals with unrealistic proposals. Harassing them? I laughed bitterly. My AI platform has reduced their diagnostic errors by 37%. They're planning to expand the program to 3 other departments next quarter. I pulled out another envelope from the mail stack, this one from the American Medical Association. Inside was a letter notifying me that I had been selected as a finalist for their Innovation in Healthcare Technology Award, with the ceremony scheduled for next month in Chicago. This is a nomination for one of the most prestigious technology awards in healthcare, I said, reading from the letter. But I almost missed the deadline because someone has been intercepting my mail. The family sat in stunned silence as I continued going through the intercepted correspondence. There were thank you notes from hospital administrators, interview requests from medical journals, and invitations to speak at 3 major healthcare conferences. Sarah found her voice first. Ethan, I had no idea. Jake told us your company was just a website that wasn't making any money. And you believed him without ever asking me directly. We tried to ask, Frank said defensively, but every time we brought up your work, you got defensive and changed the subject. Because every conversation about my career turned into an intervention about my life choices, I shot back. When was the last time any of you asked a genuine question about what my company actually does, instead of assuming it was worthless? Uncle George shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ethan, you have to understand our perspective. We've seen people get caught up in internet schemes before. This isn't a scheme. This is a legitimate technology company with real clients, real revenue, and real employees. Employees? Mom looked surprised. 15 full-time software engineers, 3 data scientists, 2 project managers, and a chief medical officer who used to work for the Mayo Clinic. The room erupted in whispered conversations as family members tried to process this information. I could see the doubt beginning to crack in their expressions. But something else was bothering me. There's one more thing I need to understand, I said, looking directly at Frank. Dad, you said the neighbors have been asking questions about me. What exactly have you been telling them? Frank's jaw tightened, and I could see him weighing his response carefully. Dad, I told them you were going through a difficult period and that we were working on getting you the help you need. The euphemism hit me like a punch to the gut. You told them I was mentally ill. I told them you were struggling with some unrealistic expectations about your career prospects. That's the same thing, Sarah said quietly, her legal training recognizing the implications. Dad, if people think Ethan has mental health issues that could affect his professional reputation. Frank's face flushed with anger. I was trying to protect him from embarrassment when these computer games inevitably fail. Protect me. I felt my voice rising again. You've been sabotaging my reputation based on assumptions you never bothered to verify. Jake tried to interject. Ethan, we had good reasons to be concerned. Based on what? Based on the fact that you've been intercepting my mail and telling lies about my company. The confrontation was spiraling beyond what anyone had anticipated. What was supposed to be an intervention about my unrealistic career goals had turned into an exposure of my family's systematic undermining of my success. Then Frank said something that changed everything. Son, there's something else you need to know. Something that changes the urgency of this conversation. His voice had shifted to a tone I had never heard before, a combination of fear and resignation that made my stomach clench. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The words hit the room like an explosion. Mom started sobbing. Sarah gasped, and Jake closed his eyes as if he had been dreading this moment. The doctors give me 12 to 18 months. Frank continued, his voice breaking slightly. I've been trying to get all my affairs in order, and that includes making sure my children are prepared for the real world after I'm gone. I felt the anger drain out of me, replaced by a crushing sense of loss and confusion. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because you've been living in this fantasy world, and I was afraid you wouldn't be able to handle reality when the time came. I wanted to get you settled in a stable job before. He couldn't finish the sentence. Jake stepped forward, tears in his eyes. That's why we organized this intervention, Ethan. Dad is dying, and we can't let you fall apart when he's gone. You need stability, not these risky business ventures. I looked around the room at my family, seeing them clearly for the first time. They weren't trying to hurt me out of malice. They were trying to protect me based on their own fears and their complete misunderstanding of my situation. But their good intentions had led them to systematically destroy my credibility, intercept my correspondence, and undermine my professional relationships. And now they expected me to abandon everything I had built because they couldn't accept that their assumptions about my life had been completely wrong. I stood in the middle of my family's living room, processing the devastating news about my father's cancer, while simultaneously grappling with the magnitude of their betrayal. The two emotions warred inside me, grief mixing with anger, in a way that left me feeling hollow and energized at the same time. I said quietly, I'm sorry about your diagnosis. I wish you had told me sooner. Frank nodded, wiping his eyes. I wanted to tell you, son, but I needed to know you were going to be okay first. And you thought the best way to help me was to sabotage my career? We thought your career was sabotaging itself, Jake interjected. Everything we did was because we love you. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text message while the family watched. Within 30 seconds, I received a response that made me smile for the first time since entering the house. Who are you texting? Sarah asked suspiciously. Someone who can help clarify a few things, I replied, walking toward the window to watch for a car in the driveway. Uncle George looked confused. Ethan, we're trying to have a serious family discussion here. Oh, this is about to get very serious, I assured him. 15 minutes later, headlights swept across the front yard as a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. I recognized the car immediately and felt a surge of satisfaction as my family peered through the window to see who was arriving. The doorbell rang, and I walked over to answer it myself. Standing on the porch was Marcus Williams, my company's attorney, holding a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of expensive suit that commanded immediate respect. Behind him was my girlfriend Maya, carrying her laptop bag and looking determined. Good evening, Ethan, Marcus said in his polished baritone voice. I came as soon as I got your message. Marcus, thank you for driving over so late. Maya, I'm glad you're here too. My family watched in silence as I led the two visitors into the living room. Marcus was an imposing figure 6 feet 4 inches tall with graying temples and the confident bearing of someone who had spent 20 years handling corporate litigation for Fortune 500 companies. Good evening, he said to the room in general. I'm Marcus Williams, legal counsel for Meta-Analytics Corporation. Ethan asked me to bring some documents that might be relevant to your discussion. Frank looked skeptical. Son, you didn't need to call your lawyer to a family meeting? Actually, Dad, given what I've learned tonight about mail tampering and defamation, I think legal counsel is exactly what this situation requires. Marcus set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with practiced efficiency. Let's start with the basics, he said, pulling out a thick folder. These are the incorporation documents for Meta-Analytics, filed with the state of Colorado in October 2021. He spread the papers across the table, and even Uncle George had to lean forward to see the official state seal and registration numbers. Here we have the company's tax returns for the past 2 years. Marcus continued producing another set of documents. As you can see, gross revenue for last year was $4.2 million, with a net profit of $1.8 million. Aunt Patricia's eyes widened as she saw the numbers. Those are real tax returns, filed with the Internal Revenue Service and audited by Morrison Chen and Associates. Marcus confirmed, one of the most respected accounting firms in Denver. Maya opened her laptop and turned it toward the family. I thought you might want to see this too, she said, pulling up a web browser. This is the Forbes article that was published last night. The headline filled the screen, Colorado startup Meta-Analytics valued at $92 million in groundbreaking healthcare AI deal. Below the headline was a professional photograph of me, standing in front of my company's logo, along with quotes from hospital administrators, praising the platform's effectiveness. The article has been shared over 3,000 times on social media, Maya said, scrolling through the comments. Most of these responses are from healthcare professionals who want to learn more about implementing the platform in their facilities. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. This is really in Forbes? The actual Forbes magazine. Digital edition and print edition, Marcus confirmed. The print version will be on newsstands nationwide next week. Jake sat down heavily, the color draining from his face, as the reality of his mistake became clear. Ethan, I had no idea. The things we heard about tech startups were completely irrelevant to my situation, I finished. But instead of asking me for accurate information, you made assumptions and then acted on those assumptions in ways that could have seriously damaged my business. Marcus pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Speaking of damage, there are some legal issues we need to address. Jake, is it true that you've been intercepting Ethan's mail? I wasn't trying to break the law, Jake said defensively. I was just worried about him getting in trouble. Mail tampering is a federal offense, Marcus said, matter-of-factly, punishable by up to 5 years in prison and significant fines. The fact that your intentions were good doesn't change the legal reality. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Uncle George, with his banking background, understood legal liability better than most. Jake, you need to take this seriously. Federal crimes can destroy your medical license. There's more, I said, looking at Sarah. My attorney has discovered that someone using legal database access conducted unauthorized background checks on my company and its employees. Sarah's face went white. How did you find out about that? Because the company you used to run those searches has an automatic notification system for the subjects of background investigations, Marcus explained. They send alerts whenever someone accesses personal information without proper legal justification. Sarah, please tell me you didn't use your law firm's database access for personal research. Frank said, his voice filled with dread. I was trying to protect Ethan, she said weakly. I wanted to make sure he wasn't involved with criminals or con artists. Marcus shook his head. That's a violation of State Bar Association ethics rules. Using privileged legal access for unauthorized personal investigations can result in suspension or disbarment. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness as I watched my siblings realize the consequences of their actions. They had been so convinced of my failure that they had risked their own careers trying to prove it. And Dad, I continued, Marcus has also discovered that you've been making defamatory statements about my company to business associates. Frank's face hardened. I never said anything that wasn't true. You told the owner of Mountain View Hospital that I was mentally unstable and that my company was a dangerous delusion, Marcus read from a legal pad. Mr. Davidson documented the conversation because he was confused about why you would warn him against a company that his own medical staff had recommended. The revelation hit Frank like a physical blow. Mountain View Hospital had been one of my company's earliest clients, and their endorsement had helped me secure contracts with 3 other medical facilities. You called my clients? I said, my voice barely controlled. You actively tried to sabotage my business relationships. I was trying to protect people from being taken advantage of, Frank insisted. By lying about my mental health, I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of an email. This is from Dr. Patricia Liu at Mountain View. She says someone claiming to be my father called and suggested that I was having psychological problems and that the hospital should reconsider their contract with my company. Mom started crying again. Frank, how could you do that? Because I thought I was saving our son from humiliating himself, he replied, his voice breaking. I thought these people would eventually realize his company was worthless, and I didn't want him to be devastated when it happened. Maya spoke up for the first time since arriving. Mr. Thompson, I think you should know that Ethan's company has been approached by Google, Microsoft, and IBM about potential acquisition deals. The preliminary offers range from $150 million to $250 million. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Even Marcus looked impressed by the numbers. Those are preliminary discussions, I clarified. Nothing has been finalized, but the interest is real and it's serious. Frank stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Son, if that's true, then I've made a terrible mistake. You've all made terrible mistakes, I said. But the question now is what we're going to do about it. Marcus closed his briefcase and looked around the room. From a legal standpoint, Ethan has grounds for civil lawsuits against each of you. The mail tampering, unauthorized background checks, and defamatory statements have all caused measurable damage to his business interests. Are you going to sue us? Sarah asked quietly. I looked at my father pale, and suddenly looking every one of his 62 years, and felt the anger drain out of me again. I don't want to sue my family, but I can't pretend this didn't happen either. Jake leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. Ethan, what can we do to make this right? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But the first step is acknowledging that your assumptions about my life were completely wrong, and that your actions based on those assumptions have had real consequences. Uncle George cleared his throat. Ethan, I think I speak for everyone here when I say we owe you a sincere apology. We let our fears and misconceptions cloud our judgment. Apologies are a start, Maya said, but they don't undo the damage to Ethan's professional relationships or the stress this has caused him during the most important period of his company's growth. I watched my family members exchange glances, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of their mistake. But I wasn't finished yet. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the last piece of mail from the stack on Mom's table. This envelope is from the University of Colorado Hospital. Want to guess what it says? I held the unopened envelope from University of Colorado Hospital, watching as my family's expression shifted from guilt to confusion. The University Medical Center was one of the most prestigious healthcare institutions in the region, and their correspondence with me would carry significant weight. This letter arrived 2 weeks ago. I said, carefully opening the envelope while maintaining eye contact with Frank. Right around the time you were telling people I was mentally unstable. Inside the envelope was a formal letter on university letterhead signed by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the Chief of Medical Innovation. I read aloud, "Dear Mr. Thompson, on behalf of the University of Colorado Hospital Board of Directors, I am pleased to inform you that your artificial intelligence platform has been selected for implementation across all 7 of our medical facilities. The initial 3-year contract is valued at $8.4 million, with renewal options that could extend the partnership for up to 10 years. The room fell completely silent. Even Marcus looked surprised by the size of the contract. There's more, I continued reading. Additionally, we would like to invite you to serve on our newly formed Healthcare Technology Advisory Board, a position that includes an annual consulting fee of $250,000 and equity participation in our medical device investment fund." Aunt Patricia's mouth hung open. $8.4 million. Well, that's just from one client, Maya said, pulling up additional documents on her laptop. Would you like to see the other contracts Ethan's company has signed in the past 6 months? She turned the screen toward the family, revealing a spreadsheet showing confirmed deals with 12 major medical facilities across Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. The total contract value exceeded $23 million over 3 years. Uncle George, despite his banking experience, seemed to be struggling with the numbers. "Ethan, these contracts are bigger than most construction projects I've financed." "And they're growing," I said. "Next month, we're presenting to a consortium of California hospitals that could add another $15 million in revenue." Frank sat down slowly, his face gray with shock and what I now recognized as shame. "Son, I don't understand. If your company is this successful, why didn't you tell us?" "Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you shut the conversation down," I replied. "Remember last Christmas when I mentioned the children's hospital contract, Jake said I was getting ahead of myself, and you changed the subject to Sarah's latest court case." Sarah winced at the memory. "I remember that conversation. I thought you were exaggerating about the hospital deal." "I wasn't exaggerating. I was trying to share good news with my family, but you had already decided my career was a fantasy." Marcus pulled out another document from his briefcase. "There's something else the family should know about the consequences of their actions. Mr. Thompson, your statements to business associates have created liability issues that extend beyond defamation." Frank looked alarmed. "What kind of liability issues?" "2 of the hospitals you contacted have documented your claims that Ethan was mentally unstable. When those facilities later signed contracts with Med Analytics anyway, they included clauses requiring additional psychological evaluations and leadership assessments that cost the company over $60,000 in unnecessary consulting fees." $60,000? Mom gasped. "That's the measurable financial impact of questioning Ethan's mental health," Marcus explained. "But the reputational damage is harder to quantify. There are now questions in the medical community about whether Med Analytics has family stability issues that could affect long-term reliability." Jake leaned forward, his medical training helping him understand the implications. "In healthcare, trust and reliability are everything. If hospital administrators think there are concerns about the company leadership's psychological state, that could affect major decisions about long-term contracts." "Exactly," I said. "And that brings me to the biggest problem created by your interference." Maya clicked to a new document on her laptop, this one showing email correspondence with investment firms. 3 major technology companies have expressed serious interest in acquiring Med Analytics, she explained. But during their due diligence process, they discovered the family disputes and began questioning whether Ethan has the stability to lead a merged organization. "Due diligence?" Uncle George asked. "When a company considers acquiring another company, they investigate everything," Marcus explained. "Financial records, legal issues, management stability, and yes, family relationships. Corporate buyers want to know that the leadership team won't implode under pressure. I felt the weight of what my family's actions had cost me, settling heavily on my shoulders. The acquisition discussions that Maya mentioned earlier. 2 of them have been put on hold, pending resolution of what they're calling family stability concerns. Frank's face had gone completely white. Ethan, are you saying we cost you those deals? I'm saying that your public statements questioning my mental health and business judgment have created doubt in the minds of potential buyers. They're worried that family drama could affect my ability to integrate successfully into their organizations. Sarah stood up abruptly, her legal training kicking in as she processed the full implications. Oh my God. Ethan, those acquisition deals could have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Google preliminary offer was $210 million, Maya confirmed. Microsoft indicated they might go as high as $260 million for full acquisition plus retention bonuses. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. My family began to realize that their well-intentioned intervention had potentially cost me the biggest opportunity of my career. Cousin Marcus, who had been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Ethan, I don't understand something. If you knew about these deals and these contracts, why didn't you just show us the documentation months ago? Because I shouldn't have to prove my success to my own family, I replied. You should have trusted me enough to ask questions instead of making assumptions. Aunt Patricia looked defensive. But Ethan, you have to understand how this looked from our perspective. You were living so modestly driving that old car because I chose to reinvest in my company instead of buying status symbols to impress people who had already decided I was a failure. I interrupted. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs in history lived below their means during their company's growth phases. Jake shook his head in disbelief. Ethan, I'm a doctor. I should have recognized the difference between actual delusion and strategic business planning. I let my preconceptions override my professional judgment. And I used my legal access inappropriately, Sarah added. I could lose my license over this. Marcus nodded gravely. The State Bar Association takes unauthorized database searches very seriously. Even if the subject of the search is a family member using professional access for personal investigations, violates ethical guidelines. Frank suddenly looked much older than his 62 years. Son, I've made mistakes in my life, but this might be the worst one. I thought I was protecting you, but I've been sabotaging you instead. The cancer diagnosis doesn't excuse what happened, I said gently, but it does help me understand why you felt so urgent about trying to fix my situation. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue. Ethan, is there anything we can do to repair the damage we've caused? I looked around the room at my family members, seeing them clearly for the first time in years. They weren't malicious people. They were scared, confused, and operating from a place of genuine concern. But their fear had led them to actions that could have destroyed everything I had worked to build. There might be, I said slowly, but it would require all of you to do something that seems to be very difficult for this family. What's that? Frank asked. Trust me. Maya closed her laptop and looked around the room. There's something else you should know. While you've all been working to undermine Ethan's success, he's been doing something that might surprise you. She pulled out her phone and showed them a bank statement that made everyone lean closer to see the numbers. Wyneen, for the past 3 months, Ethan has been making anonymous payments to cover your father's experimental cancer treatment, she said to Jake and Sarah. The treatment that your insurance wouldn't cover, the one that costs $12,000 per month, Ethan has been paying for it. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Frank stared at me with tears in his eyes, and Mom started crying again. The anonymous donor the hospital mentioned, Jake asked in a whisper. That was me, I confirmed. I found out about Dad's diagnosis through a mutual friend at the hospital, and I started covering the costs immediately. But why didn't you tell us? Sarah asked. Because I knew you'd assume I was lying about being able to afford it. You were so convinced I was broke that you never would have believed I could help. Frank stood up slowly and walked over to where I was standing. For the first time in years, he looked at me without disappointment or skepticism in his eyes. "Son," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to apologize for what we've done." "We'll figure it out," I said. "But first, we need to deal with the practical consequences of this situation." I looked at Marcus, who nodded, and pulled out one final document. "There is a way to potentially salvage the acquisition discussions," he said, "but it would require the family to take some specific actions to demonstrate that the stability concerns are unfounded." "What kind of actions?" Frank asked. "Public statements acknowledging Ethan's success, formal letters of support for his business ventures, and most importantly, complete transparency about the misunderstanding that led to this situation." I watched my family's faces as they considered what Marcus was proposing. It would require them to publicly admit their mistakes and actively support the career they had spent years trying to undermine. "Would you be willing to do that?" I asked. The room fell silent as they weighed their response. Everything that happened next would determine whether our family could move forward together or whether the damage was too severe to repair. Frank stood there for a long moment, his weathered hands clenched at his sides as he struggled with what Marcus had proposed. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of Mom's quiet crying and the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "You want us to make public statements admitting we were wrong?" Frank said finally, his voice carrying the same stubborn edge I remembered from childhood arguments. "You want us to tell everyone we made mistakes about our own son?" "Dad, that's exactly what you did," I replied evenly. "You made public statements about my mental health and business competence. Now you need to publicly correct those statements." Frank's face flushed red, and I could see his construction worker pride bristling at the suggestion. "Son, I've spent 30 years building Thompson Construction's reputation in this community. I can't have people thinking I don't know how to evaluate a business opportunity." The words hit me like a slap. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of my success, he was more concerned about his reputation than the damage he had caused to mine. Jake stepped forward, sensing the tension escalating. "Dad, maybe we should think about this rationally. Ethan's company is obviously successful, and we need to acknowledge that." "I'll acknowledge it privately," Frank said stubbornly, "but I'm not going to humiliate myself in front of the whole community by admitting I was completely wrong about my own son's career." Sarah looked shocked. "Dad, we intercepted his mail and violated ethics rules based on false assumptions. We have to make this right." "I don't have to do anything," Frank snapped, his voice rising. "This is still my house, and I'm still the head of this family. I made decisions based on the information I had at the time, and I'm not going to apologize for trying to protect my son." Uncle George shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Frank, maybe you should consider the legal implications here. If Ethan decides to pursue civil action—" "Let him sue me," Frank interrupted. "I'd rather fight a lawsuit than crawl around begging forgiveness from every person in Denver." I stared at my father in disbelief. His cancer diagnosis had filled me with sympathy and love, but his stubborn refusal to acknowledge the harm he had caused was reigniting my anger. "Dad, this isn't about your pride," I said, my voice becoming harder. "This is about repairing the professional damage you caused when you told potential clients I was mentally unstable." "Those people needed to be warned," Frank replied, doubling down on his position. "Just because you got lucky with a few contracts doesn't mean I was wrong to be concerned." Lucky Maya stood up from the couch, her patience finally exhausted. "Ethan spent 5 years developing groundbreaking medical technology. He has advanced degrees in computer science and biomedical engineering. His platform has been validated by peer review and is saving lives in hospitals across the region. None of that is luck." Frank turned his glare toward her. "Young lady, you don't know this family or this situation well enough to lecture me about my son. I know Ethan well enough to see that his family has spent years undermining his confidence and sabotaging his success," Maya shot back. And I know enough about business to recognize that your interference could cost him hundreds of millions of dollars. That's enough, Frank said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used on construction sites. I don't care about hundreds of millions of dollars. Money isn't everything. You're right, I said quietly. Money isn't everything, but respect is. And you've made it clear that you can't respect my choices or my success. Jake tried to intervene again. Ethan, Dad is just having trouble adjusting to this new information. It's not new information, I replied, my frustration boiling over. You've all chosen to ignore evidence of my success for years because it didn't fit your narrative about who I am and what I'm capable of. Aunt Patricia spoke up from the couch. Ethan, you have to understand that your father is dealing with a lot right now. The cancer diagnosis has been very stressful for all of us. The cancer diagnosis doesn't excuse years of systematic sabotage, I said. And it doesn't excuse his refusal to acknowledge the damage even now that he knows the truth. Frank's face had gone from red to purple. Systematic sabotage. You think I spent years planning to hurt your career. I think you spent years assuming I would fail, and when that assumption was challenged, you worked actively to make it come true. That's ridiculous. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my saved emails. Let me read you something, Dad. This is from Dr. Rodriguez at Children's Hospital, dated 6 weeks ago, Mr. Thompson. I wanted to follow up on the concerning phone call we received from someone claiming to be your father. He suggested that your company might be unstable and that we should reconsider our contract. While we have complete confidence in your work, we felt you should know about this contact. I looked up from the phone. They were warning me about you, Dad. My own client was concerned that a family member was trying to sabotage my business relationships. Frank's expression shifted slightly, and I could see doubt beginning to creep into his certainty. Sarah had been quiet during the argument, but now she stood up with tears in her eyes. Dad, I think we need to face the reality of what we've done. I used privileged legal access to investigate Ethan's company. That's a serious ethics violation that could end my career, and I did it because we were all so convinced he was delusional that we never bothered to verify our assumptions. I was protecting this family, Frank insisted, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. You were protecting your image of this family, I corrected. You couldn't handle having a son who succeeded in a way you didn't understand, so you convinced yourself I was failing even when evidence suggested otherwise. Uncle George cleared his throat. Frank, I've been listening to this conversation and I think the boy has a point. We all made assumptions based on incomplete information. Whose side are you on, George Osai? Frank demanded. I'm on the side of fixing this mess before it gets worse, Uncle George replied. From a business perspective, this family owes Ethan a significant apology and whatever help he needs to repair the professional damage. Frank looked around the room, and I could see him realizing that even his own brother was not going to support his position. This is unbelievable, he said. I raised 3 children, worked my whole life to provide for this family, and now you're all turning against me because I had concerns about some computer company. We're not turning against you, Mom said softly, speaking for the first time in several minutes. We're trying to help you see that we made a mistake. Frank turned toward her, his face showing hurt and confusion. Linda, you agreed with me about Ethan's situation. You were worried about him too. I was worried because you convinced me to be worried, she replied, her voice getting stronger. But Ethan just showed us that he's been paying for your cancer treatment for months. He's been taking care of our family even while we were questioning his judgment and stability. The room fell silent as the full weight of that truth settled over everyone. I had been secretly supporting my father's medical care while he was actively undermining my career. Jake sat down heavily, his head in his hands. Ethan, I don't know how to process this. Everything we thought we knew about your situation was wrong. Not just wrong, Marcus interjected. Legally actionable. The combination of mail tampering, defamation, and unauthorized background checks has created liability exposure that could bankrupt this family if Ethan chose to pursue maximum damages. Frank stared at Marcus as the legal reality began to sink in. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that Ethan has been extraordinarily generous in offering you an opportunity to make this right voluntarily. If he wanted to pursue civil litigation, he could probably recover millions in damages and certainly destroy several family members' professional licenses. But he hasn't done that, Maya added. Because despite everything you've put him through, he still cares about this family. I looked at my father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. He was a man who had built his identity around being the provider and protector of his family, and my success in a field he didn't understand threatened that identity. His actions weren't born of malice, but of fear and insecurity. Dad, I said gently, I know this is hard for you to accept, but I need you to understand that your refusal to acknowledge what happened is going to cost me opportunities that may never come again. What opportunities? He asked quietly. Maya pulled out her phone and showed him an email thread. Google's acquisition team sent this message 2 days ago. They're putting their offer on hold pending resolution of what they're calling management stability concerns raised during family background interviews. Frank read the email, his face growing pale. They talked to people about our family? Checked her. Corporate due diligence always includes family stability assessments for key leadership, Marcus explained. When they discovered that Ethan's own father had been publicly questioning his mental health and business judgment, they became concerned about potential ongoing conflicts. How much was Google offering? Frank asked in a whisper. $210 million, I replied, with retention bonuses that would have brought my personal total to over $80 million. Frank sat down slowly, the magnitude of what he had potentially cost me finally hitting home. $80 million. And that was just one of 3 offers, Maya added. Microsoft and IBM have similar concerns, but they've indicated they might reconsider if family stability can be demonstrated. The room was completely quiet as Frank processed this information. I could see him struggling with his pride, his fear, and his growing realization that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Son, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you need me to do? The words hung in the air like a bridge being offered across a chasm that had separated us for years. I looked at my father, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that I had never witnessed before, and felt something shift inside me. Dad, I said, sitting down across from him, I need you to understand that this isn't about humiliation or punishment. It's about repairing relationships and restoring trust. Frank nodded slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped his eyes. Tell me what you need. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a prepared document. We've drafted a family support statement that acknowledges the misunderstanding and expresses confidence in Ethan's business leadership. If the family signs this, it would go a long way toward addressing the corporate concerns. What would we be signing exactly? Sarah asked, her legal training making her cautious about any document. A statement that says the family fully supports Ethan's business ventures, acknowledges that previous concerns were based on incomplete information, and expresses confidence in his judgment and stability as a business leader, Marcus explained. Jake leaned forward to read the document. This seems reasonable. It doesn't require us to admit to anything illegal, just that we made mistakes based on misunderstandings. There's one more component, I said. I need you all to participate in family therapy sessions with Dr. Helen Chang. She specializes in helping families navigate success transitions and communication breakdowns. Uncle George looked surprised. Family therapy? Is that really necessary? It's necessary if we want to rebuild trust, I replied. We've all learned tonight that our family has serious communication problems. I can't risk having this situation repeat itself as my company continues to grow. Mom spoke up from the corner where she had been sitting quietly. Ethan, I think therapy is a wonderful idea. We clearly haven't been listening to each other the way we should. Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably. What about those of us who aren't immediate family? Do we need to participate too? You participated in the intervention, Maya said pointedly. You should participate in the solution. I held up my hand to prevent the conversation from becoming confrontational again. The extended family participation is voluntary, but for my parents and siblings, it's not negotiable if we want to move forward. Frank looked around the room at his family members before focusing on me again. Son, if that's what it takes to repair the damage I've caused, then I'm willing to do it. We all are, Sarah said, speaking for herself and Jake. Ethan, I want you to know that I'm going to voluntarily report my database misuse to the state bar. I'd rather face disciplinary action honestly than have it discovered later. Jake nodded in agreement. And I'm going to write letters to every medical facility I know, explaining that my concerns about your company were unfounded and recommending your platform. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest as I watched my family members stepping up to take responsibility for their actions. But I knew that words alone wouldn't be sufficient to repair the damage. There's something else, I said. I want to establish a family foundation focused on medical technology research and education. I'll fund it with $5 million from my company's profits, and I want each of you to serve on the board. Frank looked confused. Why would you want us on the board after what we've done? Because I want us to work together instead of against each other. The foundation will give you a chance to understand my work and contribute to something meaningful. Maya pulled out her laptop and showed them a presentation she had prepared. Ethan has also decided to use his success to help other family members pursue their own goals. Frank, he's prepared to fund experimental cancer treatments that insurance doesn't cover, not just for you, but for other families facing similar diagnoses. And Sarah, I continued, I know you've always wanted to start a nonprofit legal clinic for families dealing with medical bankruptcies. I'd like to provide the startup funding for that project. Sarah started crying again, but this time with gratitude rather than shame. Ethan, I don't deserve that after what I put you through. It's not about what anyone deserves, I said. It's about what kind of family we want to be going forward. Jake stood up and walked over to me, extending his hand. Brother, I owe you an apology that I'll probably be making for the rest of my life. I let my medical training make me arrogant about things I didn't understand. I shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug. We're going to figure this out, Jake. But no more amateur psychological evaluations, okay? He laughed despite his tears. Deal. Over the next 2 hours, we worked through the practical steps needed to repair the professional damage. Marcus explained the timeline for submitting the family support statements to the acquisition teams, and Maya scheduled the first family therapy session for the following week. Uncle George approached me before leaving. Ethan, I want you to know that I've learned something important tonight. Just because I understand traditional business doesn't mean I understand all forms of business. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Aunt Patricia hugged me awkwardly before heading to her car. I still don't understand computers, but I understand success when I see it. I'm sorry we couldn't see it sooner. After the extended family members left, I sat with my parents and siblings in the living room where I had grown up. The space felt different now, less like a courtroom and more like a home. Dad, I said, I want you to know that paying for your cancer treatment wasn't about proving anything. It was about family taking care of family. Frank's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. Son, I spent so many years worrying about whether you could take care of yourself that I never realized you were taking care of all of us. That's what families do, I replied, but we have to trust each other enough to let it happen. 3 weeks later, I received confirmation that Google had renewed their acquisition discussions based on the family support statements and evidence of improved family dynamics. The final offer came in at $230 million with additional performance bonuses that could bring the total to over $300 million. 6 months later, Frank's cancer went into complete remission, aided by the experimental treatments we could now afford without financial stress. Jake had become one of my company's biggest advocates in the medical community, and Sarah's nonprofit legal clinic was serving families across 3 states. The family foundation we established has funded research grants at 4 universities and provided scholarships for students pursuing careers in medical technology. Frank serves as the board chairman, and his business experience has proven invaluable in managing the foundation's operations. During one of our family therapy sessions, Dr. Chang asked me what I had learned from the experience. I thought for a long time before answering. I learned that success isn't just about building something valuable, I said. It's about having people in your life who can celebrate that success with you. But those people have to be willing to see and accept who you really are, not who they think you should be. Frank nodded from across the circle. And I learned that being a protective father doesn't mean trying to limit your children's dreams. Sometimes it means learning to dream bigger yourself. The acquisition deal with Google was finalized on a Tuesday morning in March. This time, when I held the celebration, my entire family was there. Frank gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how proud he was to have a son who had taught him that success comes in many forms. As I looked around the room at my family, my employees, and my friends, I realized that the intervention that was supposed to save me from my delusions had actually saved all of us from something much worse, a life where fear and misunderstanding kept us from supporting each other's dreams. The biggest lesson wasn't about business or money, or even family dynamics. It was about the courage required to fight for your place in your own family, not by abandoning them when they can't see your worth, but by refusing to let their fears diminish your vision of what's possible. Sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't against competitors or market forces or even our own limitations. Sometimes they're against the people who love us most, who want to protect us so desperately that they try to make us smaller than we're meant to be. The real victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in helping them see that your success doesn't diminish them, it elevates everyone around you. True strength comes from lifting others up with your accomplishments, even when they've tried to tear you down. Money can buy many things, but it can't buy the feeling of your father's genuine pride or your family's authentic support. Those things have to be earned through patience, forgiveness, and the willingness to keep extending your hand even when it's been slapped away before. In the end, I didn't just build a successful company. I helped rebuild a family that had lost its way, and that turned out to be the most valuable creation of all. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for your dreams within your own family? Have you found yourself caught between pursuing your goals and maintaining relationships with people who don't understand your vision? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and achieving success despite the odds. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening, and remember, your dreams are valid even when the people closest to you can't see their value yet. Keep building, keep believing, and never let anyone else's limitations become your own.